Well, here we are again, and seeing last time I talked about my favorite toys I got originally back in the day with my G1 Transformers. I talked about Prime, Soundwave, what they meant to me. I thought this one I'd go in the opposite direction and talk about the ones I wanted so much, but every time I unraveled one of those little toy catalogs that they gave you with the Transformers, or you would see the exact same things in different store advertisements and stuff like that that had all the Transformers. One of the main guys I wanted was Ironhide. Ironhide was fantastic. I loved Ironhide. And then I would open up that little pamphlet and I'd see sad Ironhide without his head, which is well documented how many people upset about that fact that he had no head. And it's funny because I do remember as a kid, so many times I'd look through that almost like I was hoping it had changed. Like every time I got a new Transformer, I'd open up that thing looking at the Transformers and I'd look at Ironhide because I really wanted Ironhide. And I'm like, yeah, it's the same one. I don't like him. But I really wanted him. So that being said, I kind of wanted to dedicate a little bit of this episode to the toys that I didn't get that I wanted, but every time I looked at them, I was like, no, that's not it. So for me, Ironhide is obviously the one that gets the most hate, so to speak, and Ratchet because of the no head. I do love these guys. These are the Hasbro versions. I am looking forward to Fans Toys versions. I think they knock the chest down just a tad bit more, but honestly, these guys are fantastic. I really like them. I was super happy because that long desire to finally have Ironhide in particular, and Ratchet, but you know, it was really Ironhide. I finally got it. So super happy about finally getting Ironhide and Ratchet. And I'll admit, as a collector, I have also got some of the reissues of Ironhide and Ratchet without their heads. I don't open those boxes. I've mentioned in the past that I never used to open up the toys. The only ones I typically do are my masterpieces just because I really like them. That being said, I've gotten some of those on the reissues. And I do appreciate the fact that they came in car mode. So some of them you can actually see inside the packaging and see it in the car mode. And I very much like that because I just hate Ironhide without a head. That being said, another toy, which like as an adult, and I look back and it just feels like you can't have a collection without a Megatron. So again, I really like Hasbro's version of their masterpiece for Megatron. I think he's absolutely great. But again, the original toy, I just didn't like it. It was made to look realistic in the gun mode, but the toy, especially when you had this little guy sticking out the side, and what will I say, that crotch thing that was happening with the trigger and everything, it just looked absolutely horrible. So this is one of those guys that as an adult, I love the versions that have come out since then. But again, as a kid, you know, I really wanted them, but then I just hated the toy. And that being said, as much as I hated the toy, you still wanted it. And again, you looked into those catalogs. And as a kid, and you're like making your Christmas list or your birthday list, and you started looking at them and circling the ones you want. And you always went back to those ones that you knew you didn't like, and you're like, I still don't want it, even though you really did want it. You didn't want that version. I think it's funny because I was looking at one of the catalogs, trying to think back of some of the other ones while I was on this topic of toys I didn't get because I just didn't like the way they represented them in toy mode versus the cartoon. And it's funny, Jetfire, Skyfire, I wish I had gotten that one. I didn't. Again, because it just didn't look like the way he did in the toys, which I understand. There was a Robotech thing. which is funny because I loved Robotech, and I just didn't really think about wanting him because he looked like Robotech. I wanted a Robotech toy, which I almost had, but I messed that up. It was at a fun day with my mom, and we went to this little mall that had an indoor park, and I wanted to go on some more rides, and it was a toy or some more rides, so I went on more rides. I should have taken the toy. Stupid little kid, but hey, what are you gonna do? So anyways, that's one of those ones where I really, really wish that I had gotten it in the Transformers or the Robotech mode. You know, but it just didn't look like the way it did in the cartoon, so I didn't want it. And I was very much, as a kid, I wanted the ones that looked more like toys. I will say, every once in a while, I think about, in my collection, which ones are the ones I would be saddest to be without. And I do think my Realistic Fan Toys version of Skyfire, Jetfire, is definitely one of my favorites. You know, the guy behind me is also one of my favorites by Hasbro, but if I couldn't have or not have certain ones, like, it's like Grimlock, you know, I can't imagine not having Prime, but the Primes, there's so many Primes that it's not quite the same. I love my Ultra Magnus, but the Jetfire I think is really, really high on my list, and it's probably because just like Ironhide, just like Ratchet, just like Megatron, I didn't like the toy versions as a kid. So to finally get a cool one as an adult, it's also the same as Unicron. To have a really cool version of Unicron is like a childhood dream. So anyways, what toys did you really, really want as a kid, and then you looked at them and you were most disappointed? I'd love to hear some feedback on that, and we'll see if some more people are like me and really wanted Ironhide, but just couldn't ask for it because he looked so bad. Well, hello again. So I wanted to talk about some of the Transformers that I changed my opinion on as I got older. So I just did a video on Transformers that I really wanted that disappointed me because the toy sucked, like Ironhide. That being said, there's certain Transformers that I kind of wish I had got because they're actually pretty cool, and I just didn't want them as a kid for some reason. I don't really have a good reason for some of them. Some of them, I kind of have a reason, but I wouldn't say it's good. So one of my favorites that I've gotten as an adult would be Sunstreaker. Now, the thing with Sunstreaker, for me, I don't know how many people remember the comic books very much. I didn't read a lot of the comic books, but there was one comic book where his whole inners were exposed and opened up. And little childhood version of me didn't think the inside of a highly sophisticated Transformer would just be basic car parts. And the person that did the comic book in many ways just had some basic parts inside. And it wasn't so much that he was exposed and injured and kind of all beat up and like looked like death. That's not the part that bothered me. It was the part that the technology inside him was just bad. And even as a kid, his attitude was more, obviously, a little cocky, and you know, he thought he was all the greatest and stuff like that. And I never really gravitated to kind of cocky characters and stuff, which is kind of ironic because sometimes I can be a little cocky. That being said, I think he was underutilized in the cartoon, and I think more people would have loved him. I think he should have been put to the forefront more. That being said, super like my Sunstreaker now. I can't remember which one this is. I think this is Transbot. I could be completely mistaken. I do have the Hasbro version of him as well. But I already had this guy open, so I didn't bother opening up another. I don't transform a lot of my Transformers. This one came in car mode, and he was not a fun one to transform. I remember being stressed the whole time I was doing it. I want to say it took me like 45 minutes just to transform this little dude. And I think I put a YouTube video on just to do it. So anyways, he's one of the ones where as an adult, I like him so much more, and I wish there was more media back in those days with him on it. I think I would have appreciated it more, but it was that cartoon that just turned me off. I hated seeing his chest all open with regular car parts and stuff. And I'll try to put an image in here of that cartoon. I did go and find one. Kind of expect this guy not to really show up on the green screen because he's a green, but Hound. So I'm gonna just test this out and see how it works. Hound had a decent toy. I just didn't get him. I don't know why. But he was one of the cooler characters in the cartoon. And probably, honestly, if I had more time as a child to get him before he was canceled, I probably would have. But he's a super cool toy, and I really like Hound, and he's one of the ones that I enjoy and appreciate so much more as an adult. So, another one of the characters that, as a kid, I didn't really care for. And it's weird because I grew up in a generation that loved guns and toys that turned into guns. But I think as a kid, it was the fact he only had the one hand, because I didn't really like any of the toys that had a gun for a hand. I don't really know why. I think it's because in my mind, they could do more stuff in my imagination with a hand, or you could put the guns in a hand, and maybe that's what I liked. Maybe I liked the little guns, and I didn't really care for hands that were a gun, because none of the characters that had guns for hands, I didn't get any of them. I just didn't like them. But as an adult, I absolutely love this guy, and I am more partial to the cartoon version where he was smart and very loyal than the comic book where he was kind of like Starscream as far as a treacherous one, but way more evil. That being said, I think in my mind, my perfect version of this guy would be super loyal, but yet that kind of insane intelligence for inventing and creating stuff. And I do like that aspect of the comic books in particular, how some of his inventions just really go off the wall, and they're pretty insane and just cruel. So I kind of like the loyal version of him, but I like that cruelty as far as a character and stuff like that he has. I think that's pretty cool. So anyways, another one of those toys that I just wish I had gotten as a kid. I just didn't have any interest, but as an adult, this character, I just like him so much more. And it probably is that comic book and even video game added details to the character that made me like him. Whereas in the cartoon, he was only there for a few minutes just to kind of kiss up to Megatron and do whatever he said and just kind of guard Cybertron. Do you think he died in the movie? I'm like, if you don't see the character died, I don't think he really died, personally. And honestly, they're robots. Even if they died, they can come back. So, in my head, he didn't die. And anyways, that's 3 of the characters that I wish I cared about more as a child that I really, really like now. We'll see, I might have to redo this whole video because I'm thinking Hound probably didn't show up. So, continuing on my little series of Transformers that I wish I had more interest in when I was a kid. And some of the interest varies. Some of them, I mentioned in the first video, Ironhide. I loved Ironhide. I wanted Ironhide. His head, everything, it was just a no-go. And every time I would go back and I'd look at that picture and I wanted him. So there's that extent of I wish I had more interest. And then there's some guys, the Decepticons, which I wanted, but there were other toys I wanted more. And we all know, especially as a child, you know, you have to make choices. Decepticon, Grimlock. Insecticon, Grimlock. I got Grimlock. You know, and there's some other toys and stuff like that that are in that framework. So it's not that I didn't like them. I actually really did want them. I think my sister might have actually had one of them. I think it was one of her only Transformers she ever had. I think it was an Decepticon. And I wish she had gotten more, but she didn't. But I think she had one for a very short period of time. I don't know whatever happened to it. I could be mistaken. That being said, I love these guys. And one of the things that I would love to do someday when I'm an adult is make a giant display of all my Transformers. And honestly, the Insecticons are one of those guys that might cost me a fortune, because I would actually like to have literally like 100 of these guys. So I have to go with some cheaper ones, or maybe I can find a way to 3D print some of them, and just kind of mix them in and behind. But I love them. A couple of the episodes in particular that always stood out in my mind is when there's just massive swarms of Insecticons basically attacking and stuff like that. That being said, I don't really have a favorite. In a way, Kickback was one of my favorites. I don't know why. I think it's just because, like in the cartoon, he summoned lightning. I really loved this guy. That being said, when it comes to the movie, and everyone debates on who became who, and let's be honest, the animators didn't exactly think or put any effort into who became who. They're just like, we're taking these, 6 Transformers, and they're just going to become these new ones. In my opinion, Scourge always should have been Bombshell. Even if it's a combination of all the others, it should have been Scourge that was Bombshell. And the reason I say that is because Bombshell was the one that could create more Insecticons, and also, had the little shots that could go into someone's head and control them and stuff. And that ability to create the others, that Scourge always had the sweeps, and every time one went down, he was able to make another somehow magically. So in my mind, that came from his abilities. Now, if you want to say that was just some parts that were thrown in there, that's good. But I'm pretty sure, if the cartoon, I could be mistaken, he went into Cyclonus, and that didn't make any sense. It should have been one of Scourge's abilities. Unless you want to say Cyclonus is the one that actually made Scourge's Armada after they would go down or something like that. Then I could buy that. But either way, just his cloning ability, I always thought that he should be Scourge. So that I just wanted to touch on as far as some of my absolute favorite Transformer Decepticons that I wish I had gotten. I left Hound out for my last video because, I'll be honest, I didn't think he would show up on my green screen at all. And I really talked very quickly about him, and he actually turned out okay. He looked a little browner than he does in person. He's definitely a lighter green than he looked on the actual green screen. That being said, I just wanted to throw out, when it came to the cartoon and stuff, his leadership and just his overall character. And if you look back on the early episodes, Bumblebee and Spike didn't really have the bond right off the bat. Like, that's something that developed over time. A lot of the early episodes, he actually hung out with Hound. Spike actually hung out with a lot of different Transformers, but a lot of the early episodes, he actually hung out a lot with Hound. And Hound was a pretty cool character. There's lots of memorable moments with Hound as well. I always got a little confused as a kid why sometimes Hound would be giving the orders to the rest of the Autobots, sometimes it would be Ironhide, and sometimes it would be Jazz. And I know we've all kind of labeled them their lieutenants afterwards, but I always felt it was weird that it was just like, okay, Hound, it's your turn to be second in control, in charge. All right, Jazz, it's your day, and then the others just followed suit. That's the thing, as adults, we put way too much thought into these things. But as a kid, I always found it kind of weird that one day he's giving instructions to Ironhide, and then the next day Ironhide's giving him instructions. Either way, Hound's pretty cool.
Space.